It's hard to talk about this babysitting job because I don't know what was real. It's hard to talk about this babysitting job because I'm still not sure what was real. I've replayed it in my head 1,000 times, trying to pull the memories apart from the nightmare, but it's all just a blur. There was this constant, faint smell of smoke, but nothing was ever burning. And these sad, sweet lullabies that just seemed to drift out of empty rooms. I try to make it all make sense, to find some kind of logic that will let me get some sleep, but I'm just left with the horrifying truth of what happened in that house. A truth I didn't understand until it was much, much too late. The job. Like a lot of these stories, it started simply enough. I needed money. I found the ad on a community board online. Babysitter needed for a quiet boy, 7 years old. Secluded house, generous pay. That word, secluded, should have been a red flag, but generous pay was all I really heard. I was broke, and I've always been good with kids. So I called. The man who answered, the boy's father, had a voice that sounded like it had been worn thin by sadness. He gave me the address and just told me to come that Friday evening. He didn't ask for references or really any questions at all. It was strange, but honestly, I was just relieved I got the job. The house was even more isolated than I'd pictured. It was miles down a winding country road, the very last house at the end of a long, dirt driveway. It was one of those beautiful old farmhouses with a big wraparound porch, but you could tell it had been neglected for a while. The paint was peeling off the sides like a bad sunburn, and the garden was just a mess of weeds. It just stood there, pushed up against these dark, dense woods, looking like the rest of the world had forgotten it existed. When I got out of my car, the first thing that hit me was the silence. It was this heavy, thick quiet, only broken by the sound of leaves rustling. My cell phone had lost its signal miles back. The father of Mr. Grady met me at the door. He looked exactly how he sounded, exhausted. His eyes were hollow, and he just moved with this deep weariness. He led me inside to a living room that was neat but felt unlived in. "Leo is upstairs in his room," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "He's a good boy. Quiet. He won't be any trouble." He handed me a short list of instructions. Bedtime at 8, no TV, a landline number for emergencies, and then he just left, vanishing into the twilight. I found Leo in his room, sitting on the floor, lining up little toy soldiers. He was small for his age, with these wide, serious eyes that looked incredibly sad. He didn't say much, just nodded when I told him my name. As I was standing in his doorway watching him play, I heard him humming this little tune. It was a simple, haunting melody I'd never heard before. The house was so still as the sun went down, and as that last bit of light faded, this profound sense of isolation started to sink into my bones. I was completely alone out here. At least that's what I thought. The first hour or so was fine. I tried to get Leo to play a game, but he seemed happy enough in his own world, humming that same song over and over. It was around 7 when I first noticed it. A smell. It was faint at first, like burning wood or a candle that had just been put out. I walked into the kitchen and checked the stove. Nothing. I went over to the living room fireplace, but it was cold, full of old ash. I just shrugged it off. I figured maybe a neighbor had a fire going and the smell was just drifting over. I went to check on Leo. He was still on the floor, building a tower with blocks. He'd stopped humming. "That's a pretty song you were humming," I said, trying to make conversation. "Where'd you learn it?" He looked up at me, his face totally blank. "Mommy sings it." I felt this little pang of sadness for him. Mr. Grady hadn't mentioned a mother. I just assumed from how sad he seemed that she had passed away or wasn't in the picture anymore. "That's nice," I said softly, and I left him to play. A little later, I was in the kitchen getting him a glass of water when I heard it. The lullaby. But it wasn't Leo. It was a woman's voice, faint and thin, and it sounded like it was coming from down the main hallway. I froze, my hand just hovering over the faucet. "Leo," I called out. No answer. I walked out of the kitchen and into the hall. The singing stopped. The house was silent again, except for the normal creaks and groans of an old building. My heart was starting to beat a little faster. "It's an old house," I told myself, my voice a nervous whisper in the empty space. Old houses make noises. The wind can sound like voices. I was just letting the creepy setting get to me. But then the smell of smoke was back, and it was stronger this time. It made my nostrils burn and my eyes water a little. A wave of real unease washed over me, this weird, misplaced panic that felt like a memory I didn't actually have. I did a full sweep of the house, every room, every closet, even the dark, musty basement. I couldn't find anything. No fire, no smoke, no reason for any of it. I sat on the couch and wrapped my arms around myself, trying to think rationally. I was tired. It was a creepy house. My mind was playing tricks on me. I was in control. I was the adult. Everything was fine. It had to be. I couldn't wait for bedtime. At 8 o'clock on the dot, I took Leo upstairs. He was even quieter now, and his small hand clutched mine. As I tucked him in, he looked up at me with those wide, haunted eyes. "Are you going to leave too?" he asked, his voice trembling. "No, sweetie," I said, trying to sound comforting as I smoothed his hair. "I'll be right downstairs. I'm not going anywhere." He just stared at me for a long moment. "That's what Mommy said." A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the drafty house. I forced a smile, said goodnight, and quietly closed his door, my hand shaking just a little. When I walked back down the stairs, the whole feel of the house had changed. It felt heavier. The air was colder, and that smoky smell wasn't faint anymore. It was thick, acrid, and choking. It smelled like a house fire. All my rationalizations just turned to dust. This was real. I stepped into the living room, and my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't the same room. The furniture I'd seen earlier was now covered in dusty white sheets, like ghosts. The floral wallpaper was peeling off the walls in blackened, scorched strips. A dark, ugly stain spread across the ceiling. The family photo that had been on the mantel was just gone. Pure panic took over. This wasn't possible. I fumbled for my phone, already knowing it was useless. No signal. I ran to the landline on the kitchen wall, my heart hammering against my ribs. I picked it up. Dead. No dial tone. Nothing. I had to get Leo. I had to get us out of there. I sprinted back up the stairs, my feet pounding on the wood. Leo's door was closed. And from behind it, I could hear the lullaby again. It was clearer now than ever before. A woman's voice, singing so softly, filled with this bottomless, heartbreaking sadness. And under the singing, another sound was getting louder. A rhythmic, hungry crackle. With my heart in my throat, I threw the door open. The room was gone. It was a nightmare of charred black wood and peeling paint. The bed was a skeletal, burnt frame. The air was thick with smoke and ash. And standing in the middle of it all, next to the ruined bed, was Leo. He was glowing in this faint, shimmery light, looking right at me. He wasn't scared. He just looked disappointed. "Mommy," he said, and his voice wasn't a little boy's voice anymore. It was a hollow echo from a long, long time ago. "You promised you wouldn't leave." It made no sense. I wasn't his mother. I was the babysitter, right? My eyes fell to my own hands. They were pale, almost see-through. I could see the flickering, ghostly image of the charred floorboards right through them. I stumbled back and caught my reflection in a shard of broken mirror on the floor. The face looking back was mine, but it was wrong. My hair was matted with soot. My clothes, the jeans and sweater I'd put on, were singed and frayed. My eyes looked like they held 100 years of sorrow. And then the memories came rushing back. Not memories of an online ad or a drive to a creepy house. These were memories of putting my sweet boy, my Leo, to bed, singing his favorite lullaby. The sudden, terrifying smell of smoke from downstairs. The fire alarm screaming, running, not away but toward his room. The incredible heat, the blinding smoke, the roar of the fire, the ceiling groaning over our heads, promising him I would never, ever leave him. And then the world collapsing into fire and darkness. The man, Mr. Grady, he wasn't a grieving father. He was the new owner. The one who kept hearing a woman's lullaby and smelling smoke in a house that had stood empty for years ever since the fire. The job wasn't real. It was a loop. A story I tell myself every night when the sun goes down. A ghost's desperate attempt to make sense of it all, to try and change how it ends. But the ending is always the same. I wasn't the babysitter. I'm the mother. I am the ghost, trapped in the night that we died. It's hard to talk about this babysitting job, because there was no job. There is only this house, the smell of smoke, and the lullaby I sing for my son forever. If you enjoy this type of content, feel free to subscribe for more strange, dark, and mysterious stories. You know, the worst part about trauma isn't really the memory of what happened, it's the fear of what it turns you into. I survived a night in a house that doesn't exist, but I'm not sure all of me ever really got out. This is the story of the babysitting job that gave me lifelong trauma. It all started 10 years ago, back in October. I was 17, scraping together every dollar I could for a beat-up sedan, which to me was basically freedom on wheels. Money was tight, so when I saw a job posting on the old corkboard at the town library, I jumped at it. It was just a simple, handwritten index card. Babysitter needed. Friday night. Call the Aldens. The pay was triple the going rate. Looking back, that was red flag number 1. But I was 17, and all I could think about was that car. I called the number, and a Mrs. Alden picked up. Her voice was soft, a little distant, but perfectly polite. She told me they lived out on the old logging road at the edge of town and just needed someone for a few hours while they went to a work gala. It sounded completely normal. When Friday night rolled around, I drove my mom's station wagon down the long, unpaved road she'd described. The house was set way back from the road, surrounded by a thick collar of pine trees that just seemed to swallow the evening light. It was a big, 2-story colonial, painted a pale, milky white that looked almost gray in the twilight. Impressive, sure, but there was a strange stillness to it. No wind chimes, no welcome mat, no signs of life at all, except for a single light on in a downstairs window. Mr. and Mrs. Alden met me at the door. They were a handsome couple, dressed to the nines. But just like the house, they felt staged. There were no family photos on the walls, no clutter from daily life, not even a scuff mark on the pristine hardwood floors. It felt less like a home and more like a showroom that no one had ever actually lived in. They introduced me to their daughter, Mara. She was about 6 years old, just sitting silently on the living room floor. Not playing, just watching me with these wide, dark eyes. She didn't say a word. Mrs. Alden just explained that Mara was quiet, but a very sweet girl. The tour was quick. They showed me the kitchen, the living room, and Mara's bedroom upstairs. Right before they left, Mr. Alden pressed a wad of cash into my hand, payment in full, up front. "Just in case we're late," he said, giving me a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. And then they were gone. The heavy front door clicked shut, and the sound echoed in the massive, silent house. The house felt even bigger, and the silence was deafening. I tried to get her to play, asking what she wanted to do. She just shook her head and walked over to a small table in the corner where there was a stack of blank paper and some crayons. For the next hour, that's what she did. She just drew. I sat on the couch, scrolling through my phone, trying to shake off this growing feeling of unease. It's just an old house, I kept telling myself. Old houses creak. But my curiosity eventually got the best of me. I walked over to see what she was drawing. It was a picture of a family, a man, a woman, and a little girl. But there was a fourth figure, standing off to the side. It was tall, unnaturally thin, and it had no face, just a smooth, blank oval of skin above a long black dress. "Who's that?" I asked, trying my best to sound cheerful. Mara didn't even look up. She just whispered, "She lives in the walls. She doesn't like when people look at her." A chill shot through me that had nothing to do with the draft in that house. I forced a laugh and said it was probably time for bed. Mara went without a fight, climbing into bed and pulling the covers right up to her chin. I closed her door and just stood in the hallway, my heart pounding. "She lives in the walls." The words just kept echoing in my head. That's when I heard it for the first time. A faint, rhythmic scratching. Scratch. 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 It was coming from somewhere down the hall. I told myself it was a mouse, or the house settling, or the wind. Anything rational I could cling to. But the sound got clearer. It wasn't scratching. It was knocking. A soft, deliberate tap, 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 coming from inside one of the walls. I felt the air catch in my throat. My mind was scrambling, trying to convince myself I was imagining it, that my anxiety was just running wild in this creepy, empty house. Driven by a mix of fear and this desperate need to prove myself wrong, I followed the sound. It led me to a part of the hallway lined with faded floral wallpaper. I pressed my ear against it, and the knocking was suddenly loud, right on the other side. My hand traced the wallpaper, and my fingers snagged on a tiny ridge. A line. A seam. Hidden in the busy pattern was the outline of a small, low door, no bigger than a cabinet. The second my fingers touched the edge of it, the knocking stopped. and a complete silence fell over the house again, somehow heavier and more menacing than before. I backed away from the wall, my mind screaming at me to get out, to run. This wasn't normal. None of it was. I bolted downstairs, grabbed the heavy cast-iron poker from the fireplace, and clutched it to my chest. I locked myself in the living room, my back against the door, and tried to call my friend Sarah. No signal. Of course. I huddled on the couch, watching the minutes on my phone tick by so slowly. An hour passed, then another. The silence was absolute. I was actually starting to think, to hope that I'd imagined it all. That my mind, spooked by a kid's drawing, had just played a trick on me. Then the landline on the end table rang. The shrill, piercing noise made me scream. It rang again, then a third time. Shaking, I picked it up. Hello? At first, there was only static. But underneath it, I could hear something. A voice. It was a distorted, guttural whisper that sounded like it was miles away and right next to my ear at the same time. I couldn't make out any words, just a wet, rasping sound that made every hair on my body stand on end. I slammed the phone down, and that's when I heard the creak from the hallway. I know I shouldn't have, but I crept to the living room door and peered through the crack. At the far end of the hall, that small, hidden door in the wallpaper was now open, just a crack. A sliver of pure, consuming blackness. I watched, completely frozen, for what felt like an eternity. And then, something moved in the darkness. A shape started to emerge, sort of unfolding itself from the crawlspace. It was tall, impossibly thin, and draped in what looked like a long, black dress. It straightened to its full height, its limbs moving with this jerky, unnatural grace. Then it turned its head in my direction. There was no face. Just a smooth, pale, featureless expanse of skin, exactly like in Mara's drawing. It didn't move toward me. It just stood there, a silent shadow in the dim hallway. A void in the shape of a person. And I knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that it was looking right at me. That was it. The thread holding me together just snapped. I didn't scream. The sound was trapped in my lungs. I fumbled for my keys, threw open the front door, and just ran. I sprinted to my mom's car, not even daring to look back, and peeled out of the driveway, gravel spitting everywhere. I just drove. After about 10 minutes of frantic, tear-blinded driving, I pulled over and finally got a signal to call the police. I was hysterical, barely coherent, just babbling about a woman with no face and a house that was wrong. To my surprise, they took me seriously enough to send a patrol car. I also called my best friend Mike, who said he'd meet me and the police back at the house. I led the cruiser back down the old logging road, Mike's car right behind me. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the steering wheel. But when I made that final turn, my blood ran cold. The driveway was gone. Where there had been a wide gravel path leading to a huge colonial house, there was now just a narrow dirt track, all overgrown with weeds and blocked by a rusted, fallen gate. We all got out of our cars. The cop shone his flashlight into the woods. There was no house. Nothing. Just an empty, overgrown lot and, way in the back, the crumbling stone foundation of a building that looked like it had been torn down 50 years ago. The police were patient, but I saw their expressions change from concern to suspicion. They asked if I'd been drinking. They searched the property and found nothing but rotting leaves and fallen trees. Mike just looked at me with this deep worry in his eyes and put a hand on my shoulder as I started to hyperventilate. The cash Mr. Alden gave me was still in my pocket. The drawing Mara made was still on a table in a house that didn't exist. It was an impossible contradiction, a moment where my reality just fractured into a million pieces. The police report said I'd likely had an acute stress reaction, or gone to the wrong address, gotten spooked, and imagined the rest. They had no record of any family named Alden living anywhere in the county. That night was the beginning of my real horror story. The memory of the faceless woman is one thing, but the aftermath, the psychological unraveling, that has been a prison. In the weeks that followed, I was treated like I was either lying or losing my mind. My parents had me see a therapist who diagnosed me with PTSD and dissociative amnesia. They said the mind can create elaborate fictions to protect itself from trauma, but they could never find a trauma to explain it. The trauma was the event itself. It was the gaslighting of my own reality. For years, I lived in a state of chronic self-doubt, second-guessing every memory, every perception. I developed severe anxiety, always on high alert. Every random noise, every creak in the floorboards, sent a jolt of pure terror through me. Was it real, or was it just my broken mind acting up again? I couldn't trust myself. My own thoughts became the enemy. The question that has haunted me for a decade is this: what's scarier? That I really did spend a night in a haunted house that blinked into existence for a few hours? Or that my own mind, for some reason I'll never know, built such a detailed, terrifying, and completely false reality? Is it better to believe in ghosts, or to believe that you're capable of that profound of a break from the world? I've read hundreds of stories online, desperately trying to find an experience that was anything like mine. If you have ever been through something you just can't explain, something that made you question your own sanity, please share it in the comments. It really helps to know you're not alone. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, please like and subscribe. Conclusion? It's been 10 years. I have a good life now, but the scars are still there. I still sleep with the lights on. I have never, ever taken another babysitting job. Sometimes, when I'm really tired or stressed, I'll catch a glimpse of something in my peripheral vision. A tall, dark shape, a flash of a pale, blank face. And for a split second, I'm 17 again, standing in that cold, silent hallway. I'm not sure if I'm remembering what happened, or if I'm just remembering what it feels like to lose your mind. And that, I think, is the most terrifying ghost of all. To think babysitting was easy money. Seriously, what's so hard about watching cartoons and eating pizza? But one night, in a house with a locked attic door, I found out that some jobs just aren't worth it. It started with a little noise I tried to brush off, a faint shuffling right over my head. But then the baby monitor crackled, and a man's voice whispered the kid's name. In that second, I knew I wasn't just a babysitter. I was bait. It was a Friday night in late October. You know the kind, where the wind has a real bite and the dry leaves scrape across the street like little claws. I'd found the job on a neighborhood app. The family, the Clarks, lived on the edge of town in one of those big old houses that's charming during the day, but gets a whole different vibe at night. Mr. and Mrs. Clark were nice, if a little stressed out, running late for some company dinner. They gave me the super fast tour, Wi-Fi password, emergency numbers, and their daughter, Lily. She was a sweet, quiet 5-year-old, already in her pajamas and zoned out in front of the TV. Everything was completely standard, almost boring. That is, until we got to the top of the stairs. At the end of the hall was a narrow, steep staircase that went up to a small door that looked like it had been painted shut. A little pull string dangled from it. Just one rule, Mrs. Clark said, but her smile seemed a little forced. The attic is off limits. The door's ancient and sticks, so we just keep it locked. It's nothing but dust and old memories up there anyway. I just nodded, not really thinking about it. Every family has its weird rules, right? Don't touch this, don't eat that. A locked attic was just another thing on the list. Once they left, the house got so quiet, the only sound was the cartoon on the TV. Lily was an absolute angel. We played for a bit, read a story, and by 8:30 she was out like a light in her room, which was at the opposite end of the hall from those attic stairs. I tucked her in, shut her door, and headed downstairs, feeling like I was making the easiest $50 of my life. I set up the baby monitor, putting one part by Lily's bed and the receiver on the coffee table next to me. I plopped down on the couch, ready for a long night of scrolling on my phone and raiding their snack cabinet. Around 10 p.m., I heard the first sound. It was so faint you could barely hear it. A quiet shuffling from upstairs. My first thought was Lily, maybe getting out of bed. I muted the TV and just listened. Nothing. Just the hum of the fridge and the normal groans of an old house settling. I told myself I was just imagining it. Old houses make weird noises. That's a fact. It was probably the wind or a tree branch scraping the roof. I was a teenage girl alone in a huge, strange house. Of course, my imagination was going to run wild. I unmuted the TV, turning it up a bit louder, trying to kill the silence. But then I heard it again, and this time it was clearer. Not a shuffle. It was a slow, heavy footstep. And then another one. They were dragging, deliberate. And they were coming from right above me. From the attic. My blood turned to ice. The attic. The one Mrs. Clark made a point to tell me was locked and empty. I just froze, staring at the ceiling. I tried to find a logical reason. A raccoon? A squirrel? But this didn't sound like an animal. This sounded like a person. My heart started pounding against my ribs. I grabbed my phone, my thumb hovering over my mom's name. This is so stupid, I thought. You're gonna call your mom because a house creaked? She'd think I was crazy. I took a shaky breath. Get it together, I muttered to myself. You're just scaring yourself. I decided to do a quick patrol, just for peace of mind. I crept up the stairs, and every single step I took seemed to echo through the house. I peeked into Lily's room. She was sound asleep, breathing peacefully. I checked the hallway windows, locked tight. Then I stood at the bottom of the attic stairs and just stared up at that closed door. The string was hanging perfectly still. It was just a dusty old attic. There was nothing to be afraid of. I went back downstairs, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I tried to get back into the movie, but it was useless. Every creak, every gust of wind sent a shock of anxiety through me. I ended up just sitting on the edge of the couch, hugging a pillow, my eyes scanning the dark corners of the room. And then the baby monitor on the coffee table crackled. It started with that low hiss of static, the kind you get with a bad connection. I figured the battery was dying, but the light was solid green. The static got louder, scratchier, and then I heard something under it. A sound that had no business being there. It was breathing, slow, deep, and raspy. It wasn't the soft breathing of a little kid. This was heavy, labored, like someone had their mouth pressed right against the microphone. My own breath caught in my throat. My mind raced through possibilities. Was it picking up a stray signal? A neighbor's monitor? That has to be it. It happens with older models. I reached out to turn it off, but before I could, the breathing stopped. The static died down. And then a voice whispered through the speaker. It was a man's voice. Dry and low, but clear as a bell. Lily, just her name. That was it. But the way he said it, it was so familiar, so intimate, that the hair on my arms stood straight up. This wasn't a radio signal. This was in the house. The sound was coming from the other monitor, in Lily's room. Pure, cold panic hit me. Someone was in her room. I bolted up the stairs, my heart pounding so loud I couldn't hear anything else. I didn't even think, I just ran. I threw her door open, ready to scream or fight or whatever I had to do. The room was empty. Lily was still fast asleep, totally fine. The window was locked. The closet was shut. Nobody was there. The baby monitor sat on her nightstand, its little green light glowing innocently. Was I losing my mind? Had I imagined all of it? The footsteps, the breathing, that voice? I backed out of her room, completely disoriented. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from, unable to tell what was real and what was just fear. I ran back downstairs and locked the front and back doors, checking each lock 3 times. I slammed all the curtains shut. I felt like a million eyes were on me. I went back to the main staircase and looked up, my eyes immediately drawn to those little stairs leading to the attic. The pull string. Was it swaying? Just a tiny bit? Or was I just seeing things? I couldn't stay there. I ran back to Lily's room and scooped her out of bed. She was groggy and started to cry, but I didn't have time to explain. I carried her into her parents' bedroom, the only room I knew had a good, solid lock. I shoved a heavy dresser in front of the door, my hands shaking so hard I could barely get a grip. With Lily sobbing in my arms, I huddled in the corner, my back pressed against the wall, and dialed 911. My voice was shaking when I talked to the dispatcher. I'm sure I sounded completely unhinged. I'm a babysitter, I whispered, terrified of being overheard. I think someone's in the house. I heard footsteps in the attic, and a man's voice on the baby monitor. The dispatcher was incredible, so calm and professional. She kept me on the line, asking for the address, my name, where we were. She told me officers were on their way. The next 5 minutes felt like 5 years. Every single sound from outside the door was terrifying. A floorboard creaking, the house humming, the wind rattling the windows. I just clutched Lily, who was now terrified, and whispered that it was going to be okay, not sure if I was trying to convince her or myself. Then we heard it. A loud crash from upstairs, right above us. It sounded like something huge had been knocked over. Lily screamed. The dispatcher told me to stay quiet and stay on the line. Then I heard sirens growing louder, the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. I heard the crunch of tires on the driveway, and red and blue lights flashed across the bedroom walls. A moment later, a loud voice boomed from downstairs. "This is the police. Is anyone in here?" "I'm in here," I yelled back, my voice hoarse. "In the master bedroom, I'm the babysitter." I heard them moving through the house, clearing the ground floor. Then 2 officers came upstairs and knocked. "Ma'am, it's the police. Can you open the door?" My hands were still trembling as I pushed the dresser out of the way and unlocked the door. 2 officers stood there, their faces serious. I told them everything. The noises, the monitor, the attic. They gave each other a look, that mix of, "Is she crazy?" and "What if she's not?" One officer stayed with me and Lily while the other went to check the attic. He came back a few minutes later, and his face was pale. "You need to see this," he said to his partner. I followed them into the hall, my heart pounding in my throat. They'd pried the attic door open. It hadn't been locked from the outside, it was barred from the inside. A stale, disgusting smell washed down the stairs. One of the officers aimed his flashlight into the darkness. The beam landed on a little, makeshift living space. A dirty mattress on the floor, surrounded by empty food wrappers and water bottles. In the corner was a small bucket he was clearly using as a toilet. And in the middle of it all was a bizarre electronic setup, a tangle of wires running from a stack of batteries to a small receiver. It was a listening device, and it was tuned to the exact frequency of the Clarks' baby monitor. He had been living up there. For how long, nobody knew. Weeks? Months? Just listening. Watching them through cracks in the floorboards. The Clarks had heard noises now and then, but just wrote it off as the sounds of an old house. He was there the entire time, a silent, invisible roommate. The police figured he'd escaped through a tiny attic window onto the roof as soon as he heard the sirens. He was gone. But knowing he'd been there left a deep, disgusting stain on the whole house. He hadn't just been in the attic. He'd been in their lives, a parasite on their family's safety. When the Clarks got home to find 2 police cars in their driveway, their world just shattered. It was surreal trying to explain what happened. Mrs. Clark just collapsed into sobs, holding Lily, while Mr. Clark stood there in total disbelief. The police found out the man had been climbing an old oak tree next to the house to get into the attic. My parents came to get me. I never saw the Clarks again. I don't think I said a single word on the car ride home. I just stared out the window, feeling completely disconnected from everything. For years after that, I couldn't sleep without checking my closet 3 times. The sound of radio static would make me feel sick. The whole thing became a sort of local legend, the kind of story you tell at sleepovers to scare your friends. It wasn't until later that I learned about the classic urban legend, the babysitter and the man upstairs. I realized I was living a version of that story. The creepy calls, the threat coming from inside the house, it was all there. But for me, it wasn't just a spooky tale you tell in the dark. It was a real night, with a real little girl I had to protect, and a very real monster. And it's a chilling reminder that sometimes the scariest secrets are hidden in the safest places, just 1 floor above your head.